For us to think that there was some sort of foreign adversary country right on the heels of World War II that somehow managed to evolve technologically 1,000 years ahead of the United States, and for the last 70 years it's been the best kept secret despite the billions of dollars we put into our intelligence community, doesn't make sense. It's so far beyond what you would consider common sense. Countries like Russia, let's say, well, better yet, countries like China, who are stealing billions of dollars worth of our technology every year, do you think that they would be doing that if they already had this technology 70 years ago?
And this has been occurring, Tucker, again, since 1950, according to official U.S. government documentation. So think about that for a minute when we talk about that on the backdrop of this recent revelation that the U.S. government has finally admitted that this is not some sort of secret U.S. technology. Well, okay, that's great. We already knew that. But now there is some wiggle room to say, well, maybe it's some sort of foreign adversarial technology. Well, here's the problem with that theory, because we know that the Russians, after the Berlin Wall came down, they shared a lot of information with us. There was this 5-year period or so, this new romance between us and Russia, where they shared a lot of their UFO information with us. And by the way, they were seeing exactly the same thing in their skies that we were. So we're sure it's not Russian. So then really the only other country that could possibly be would maybe be China. Well, let's look at that for a second, Tucker, because you're talking about a country that for 70 years has kept this technology that was at least 1,000 years ahead of us, kept it secret, was able to employ it against us all the way back in 1950. By the way, this is the same country that steals billions of dollars worth of our technology each year, trying to keep a competitive advantage to this day with our country. Now, does that make a whole lot of sense to you?
No. It does. I mean, there were famines in China 70 years ago.
There's enough data to suggest that there are things operating within our own airspace that is A, it's not ours. B, we're pretty sure it's not foreign adversarial. C, it's been doing this for a long time. And D, there's not a whole lot we can do about it.
The U.S. government has already stated now for the record, according to some of these inside sources, that this is definitely not some sort of secret U.S. technology. So that argument now is finally, for many decades now, is finally off the table. So that really only leaves two options, doesn't it? And that is, one, it's some sort of foreign technology that has somehow managed to leapfrog us, or it's something completely and totally different. And I think it's important that when we look at this, we also look at the context of the U.S. government's involvement in this topic historically. And so there is truly documentation now that is coming forward. Some of my team members have been able to uncover through the FOIA process, and that also, by the way, has been available for quite some time, that demonstrates that the U.S. government has actually indeed been dealing with this issue for over 70 years. And that's a little bit problematic, because if we say this is foreign adversarial technology, we know that the Russians, after the Berlin Wall came down, had shared a lot of their UFO files with us. And so we know they had the same problem we did. Furthermore, if that leaves, let's say, a country like China, that would then, in essence, we would have to consider the fact that China or another country now has had some sort of beyond next generation technology for the last 70 years. And as we know, that's a really hard secret to keep. And furthermore, that these technologies have been deployed over controlled U.S. airspace. So I think you're right. There's a lot more questions now we have to ask ourselves. And let's be clear, too, that the report did not say this wasn't some sort of alien type or extraterrestrial technology. It simply said it could not rule it out. And I think that's an important caveat.
I want to go to that data you're talking about that history, to give people the context you're speaking of, because you actually did share new declassified reports with our team, and they detail intelligence on UFOs resembling something like a tic-tac going all the way back to 1947. You had a CIA report from 1953 says Swedish airline pilots encountered a silver or white flying lozenge traveling at high speeds. You got an FBI report from 1964 that details a UFO that's shaped like a butane tank. And then some Navy pilots say they have seen something like a flying tic-tac in recent years as well. So, I mean, what do you think of this pattern, the similar characteristics over time? What's your thought?
I think the fact that you have pilots separated by decades, if not generations, reporting the same type of observations, describing the same, what is essence, the same object, a 40-foot long, whether it's a white flying butane tank or a white flying tic tac or a white flying lozenge. At the end of the day, they're describing the same thing. They're just describing it from the context of the generation that they're growing up in. So we're definitely, I think it's safe to presume that we're seeing the same objects in the sky time and time and time again. And obviously that's a concern, because if the argument is that there is some sort of foreign technology that has somehow mastered this and is 1,000 years ahead of the United States, and oh, by the way, has been demonstrating this technology for the last 70 years, I think we've got bigger problems on our hands.
The one thing we know for sure at this point is that it's not U.S. secret technology. So that takes part of the 30-year argument that this is some sort of secret Air Force, if you will, weapon platform being tested. That's now off the table. And so now we can focus more, I think, on the foreign adversarial perspective, or hopefully maybe something on something, quite frankly, sufficiently different than anything that we had possibly considered before.
You know, I think we need to talk about China here, which the United States government also views as a national security threat. And China is making big investments at the moment to identify extraterrestrial life as a part of their military mission. There's discussion within the community about whether it's better for us to lead the way with confirmation versus China doing so, and possibly being dishonest about what they found. Essentially a new modern day space race.
You're right, Jackie. Not only that, they've just announced they've established a new UAP task force similar to ours, and they're using artificial intelligence to do this. We also know that there's a play by them to try to lead this conversation at the United Nations. Maybe this may be a new renaissance. Maybe this is an opportunity for our countries to work together on a common good that involves all of humanity. Maybe this is like we did in the Cold War, where we started working with the Russians to this era of cooperation, where we start meeting each other in space. I would certainly hope the latter is what happens. I don't know. You know, that's a great question, because what I hope for may be different than what I expect.
It sounds a lot like posturing between the U.S. and China. Is there anything that you're aware of that might suggest these sightings were UAP and not related to China using surveillance drones from a cargo ship in the region?
You have certain constraints whenever you're talking about a drone. You have payload and weight, you have thrust, and you have loiterability, the ability to stay on time, on target for a period of time. Now, let's just take the case of a commercial drone. And if anybody has spent any time in film industry, which we use drones a lot, one realizes that the actual airtime of a really high performance, probably one of the best drones you can buy on the market, is about 15 minutes. Okay. And you can't really be a whole long distance away. You can't be very far from that drone if you want to continue to have control of that drone, right? It loses contact, and all of a sudden you no longer can control it. There are ways where drones can stay in air much longer, but those tend not to be the rotor type. Those tend to be what we call fixed wing, where they actually fly. They have to be going at a significant speed, have enough lift under the wings. And, several hours you could technically be on what we would call on station. I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but when you look at the drones that were encountered by the USS Kidd and several other ships, first of all, it is my understanding they were called drones simply because they didn't want to say the word UAP. They didn't want to freak people out. In fact, they know that the deck logs are releasable under Freedom of Information Act. So I suspect that someone said, look, if you see any lights in the sky, you better write down the word drone. Do not write the word UAP, because that's going to get released and it's going to be a bad day for us in the press. So use the word drones. Secondly, when you look at these drones over the course of several days, right, there wasn't anything in close proximity where these things could have been launched and recovered. Drones are very expensive. And by the way, the more capable they are, the more difficult it is to just lose one in the water. They're very expensive, and the more capable, the more costly, and of course you get in trouble if you lose one. So I think the flight characteristics of these drones were very unique. First of all, they hovered. We saw that. They also moved around very much like Dave Fravor explained in his Tic Tac, in a very erratic manner. They stayed there for, in some cases, hours upon hours over the course of several days, with no ship really close enough in proximity to control these things and recover them. We never saw them go back and recover them. It was poor weather conditions, which makes it even more increasingly tough to fly a drone. And let's not forget, we have technology aboard ships. I'm not going to go into detail. That can neutralize those type of technologies. Look, if I'm on a boat, when I lived near the Chesapeake, there was a rule: if you get near more than 300 feet, get closer than 300 feet from a ship, a warship, they could shoot you out of the water. And by the way, they were prepared to do it. So for these quote unquote drones to be literally flying over the flight deck of some of these ships for hours and hours and hours, and we're doing nothing about it, should be an indicator that we're not dealing with conventional drone technology. We're probably not dealing with drones at all. Now, again, I don't want to speculate. I think it's important that we let the eyewitnesses speak for themselves. But from my understanding, several individuals who were assigned to the kid have now come forward and said, yeah, you know what? Those weren't drones. Those are something that we have no idea. In fact, a lot of people on that ship are beginning to have a conversation in a little bit more public manner. So again, I want to be careful. I don't want to say anything that's going to put the U.S. Navy in any type of situation. At the end of the day, could it be Chinese technology? Yeah, it could be. But it just simply doesn't make sense. That modus operandi for them to be doing that would be very, very provocative. It'd be very easy if it was a drone for us to just simply neutralize one and snatch it out of the sky and realize, oh, this is a Chinese drone, which would cause a lot of political friction, which China doesn't want right now. That's very provocative. And I think there's a very high probability it certainly wasn't the Chinese that was what was behind this incident. If you have a game-changing technology and you introduce it to the world, it's a matter of time before your enemies are going to have that technology. Just look at nuclear technology. That's a fact. Okay, you can only leave that cat in the bag for so long.
So the I want to get back to the triangles. People have written that they're drones, that the Chinese have really, they're poking us in the eye with these drones. I've got my DJI drone. These are just advanced drones.
When was the drone first really implemented in the United States and abroad from a commercially available perspective? Probably about 10 years ago, right? The little quadcopters.
Quadcopters, yeah.
I remember when I was in the 1990s, late 1990s, I was part of the Pioneer and Hunter UAV program. Okay, those were the best UAVs. This is before we had Predator and all that. These were basically miniature Cessnas that we outfitted to be remote controlled. And that was the best UAV programs that we had at the time. And then we came up with something called Dark Star.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
I chased the Global Hawk when I was a test pilot in 1999, 2000. Yep.
Right. You got it. So, and that was really, really it.
Those are airplanes. Those are just airplanes without people. Those are not quadcopter drones. Right.
My point being is that we were chasing these triangles back in the 80s and even earlier on, before drone technology was even not only a reality, but even thought of. So, it's one can stipulate that these are all drones. Well, sure, maybe some of them are, but they weren't back then. It's like going, as I told people before, it's like walking into King Tut's tomb for the very first time, and all of a sudden seeing a fully assembled 747 sitting in there. It doesn't make sense. The time period doesn't make sense. You could go back now and put pieces of 747 back into the tomb now, but you wouldn't expect to see one, the moment you open up a tube that has been sealed for 3,000-4,000 years. It just doesn't make sense. It's the same thing.
Right. So where have the triangles been seen? There was a Guam, the THAAD
all over the world.
THAAD is a surface area. Yeah.
All over the world. They've been seen in Russia. They've been seen out of the Pacific, over the ocean. They've been seen in Europe. They've been seen in the United States. They've been seen in South America. Pretty much wherever there's a human being, a presence of human beings, they have been seen.
And these are legit report. These aren't guys on mushrooms, and these aren't the UFO Hunter Society of Russia or whatever.
No, these are trained military eyewitness people. Okay. I'm not interested in grandma seeing some lights in the backyard. My job was only with trained military observers, and that was backed
Right.
up by some sort of data.
Okay. So you've seen data, you've seen military reports, I assume, have you talked to people who've seen these things?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're legit people.
Yeah, they're legit people, as legit as you are.
And are these, well, that's not very legit. Hopefully you found better than that. Are these drones? Are these Chinese drones that they figured out how to make quadcopters flying around?
No, they're not. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure.
I'm going to push on
nowadays
you. I'm going to be the skeptic. I'm going to push. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. You know,
Okay.
again, you know, look, let's deconstruct this logically. Okay. You're talking about your drone. How far can you fly your drone?
Well, unfortunately, I crashed it in the lake behind my house. But when it used to be a lot, and it didn't bubble and float back up, it just went to the bottom. But I'm, a couple.
How far can you fly?
Couple kilometers for
Okay.
20 minutes.
Great, 20 minutes, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, what type of technology would it take to fly a drone? Not a couple kilometers, but perhaps several hundred miles, loiter over the deck of a ship for, let's say, 3-4 hours, and then disappear under the waves, and then do that night after night after night. I'll ask you a serious question. What drone technology right now is available that we have that can do transmedium travel, that can loiter, by the way, with no long distance, right? So there's, as we know how to communicate, there's only 2 ways you can get over the horizon communications for something like that, unless you have a repeater aircraft, right? That's sending signals. You can do it through satellite and pre-arranged GPS coordinates and satellite, or you've got to be closer to your target. Well, there isn't anything that we're seeing that's closer to the target. We're the only ships out there, some cases for 100 miles. Where are they being launched from? Where are they getting their fuel? If they can't be using electric battery because you don't have the duration and the endurance.
Yeah.
So now you have to find an alternative fuel source, which means probably some sort of internal combustion engine, which means now more weight, which means a bigger, robust platform, which now means more support services for that and launch capability. You can't just hold that in your hand to launch it. You're going to need some sort of launch pad somewhere that's stable enough to hold that type of weight for that type of enduring mission, right? And oh, by the way, not get shot down. Oh, by the way, you said your drone fell into the lake. Well, we haven't found a single one of these drones floating in the water. We haven't found one.
Are we looking?
Of course we're looking. Yes, absolutely we're looking.